Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is Alan. Now, a while back we did a video that covered some of the common mistakes that sci-fi films make about space combat. You guys said in the comments of that video that you wanted a part 2, so here we are. Let's do it. There's one reason why I would never step foot inside of a TIE fighter, and that's because of its lack of deflector shields. If you're going to find yourself in a close-range space battle where ships all around you are dogfighting and being destroyed, well, first you should watch part 1 of this video, which talks about orbital mechanics and why space battles will take place at very far ranges, and then you'll begin to understand why I want deflector shields. See, when a starship explodes in atmosphere, the debris from the craft will go flying in every direction, but generally towards the surface of the planet where gravity will eventually hold it steady. If that same starship explodes in low orbit over Earth, however, an entirely different phenomenon could potentially happen called the Kessler syndrome. Proposed by NASA scientist Donald J. Kessler in 1978, the Kessler syndrome is a theoretical scenario where the density of low orbit objects becomes so great that a collision or accident can create a cascading effect that creates more collisions and more collisions until our orbit gets completely saturated by debris. We kind of get to see this in effect in the film Gravity, when a missile test accidentally creates a gigantic field of debris which circles the Earth once every 90 minutes and destroys everything in its path. In The Expanse, after the Canterbury was destroyed, one of its shuttles, the Knight, was caught in its debris field and lost one of its drives due to all of the violent collisions. But Gravity and The Expanse are actually in the minority when it comes to portraying a debris field accurately on screen. In many franchises, we see super crowded battlefields with ships on top of each other firing at point-blank ranges. Every time a ship explodes while it is orbiting a planet, the chances of it generating a massive debris field is almost certain. It's something that very few movies talk about and would quickly end any battle in real life, as both sides would begin absorbing massive amounts of damage from collisions. Movies generally get explosions wrong too, whether it's explosions in atmosphere or in deep space. For one, there's no air pressure in vacuum. This means there's very little medium for the shockwave of an explosion to travel through. This is actually a good thing because shockwaves from explosions here on Earth can do a lot of damage, especially internally to people who are caught within the blast range. But at the same time, a lack of air pressure means all of the debris from the explosion will travel much further and much quicker speeds and for a much longer time. The explosion itself will look like a brilliant flash, probably with limited fire and smoke, unless there is a source of fuel that can continuously feed it, like a tank of propellant or some oxygen canisters. But in general, an explosion in space is not going to look as spectacular as its in-atmosphere counterpart. There are also chemical explosions and nuclear explosions as well. These generally don't need oxygen. A nuclear explosion will have the added danger of radiation. The point is, explosions in space will be almost limitless. This means they'll have a very large area of effect, which is just another reason why it's better to engage your enemy from extremely far distances. No one wins in close quarter battles in space. Now, one thing that most advanced species in science fiction seem to have aboard their ships are some kind of energy shields or deflector shields, which can absorb and repulse enemy projectiles. Now, there's a general rule about weapons technology and development. The power and destructive capability of a weapon always outpaces the defensive capabilities. If humanity were capable of creating an energy shield similar to what we see in Star Wars or Star Trek, the amount of energy that shield would require to stop an incoming projectile would have to be equal to the amount of energy that projectile is producing. And on a lot of these ship designs, the shields are continuously on, putting an even larger strain on the reactor of these ships. This isn't really an energy-efficient defensive model. Ideally, what you want to do is to intercept all incoming fire with your own outgoing fire. The Expanse does a good job of portraying this. When the MCRN Doniger is engaged by enemy ships, it uses point defense cannons to prevent all incoming torpedoes and fighters from hitting it. This is a far cheaper and less energy-intensive way of dealing with incoming fire. It's a lot better than wrapping your ship in some kind of energy-intensive shield. It should also be mentioned that any energy field that is strong enough to stop physical objects from going through it will most likely also black out your communications and ability to send your own offensive fire outwards. Those point defense cannons on the Doniger are all automated, and that's the way most space combat will be done. Too often we see the trope of humans jumping into a gunner turret and providing point defense fire. The problem is, compared to a computer that has access to multiple sensors and cameras, a human is woefully equipped to track fast-moving objects. The idea of sticking a human behind the controls is a romantic idea that comes from World War II, but in reality, this is an occupation that no longer really exists. Technological advances have seen to that. On many modern naval ships today, the last line of defense from enemy fire is some kind of CIWS platform. These are automated cannons which use radar and computer algorithms to lock onto incoming objects. Even tanks today have reactive armor plates on them that fire explosive projectiles outwards to intercept incoming fire. This is also an automated system that uses sensors to read its surroundings. There are just some things that machines will always do better than humans. We did an entire list video on what we thought were the best bridge designs in science fiction. We had a really diverse and unique list of ships. It was pretty interesting, but it also became very apparent quickly that a lot of these ship designs were focused on this romantic idea of having a wide open bridge with massive windows looking out into space. While this might help in recruitment photos for your new fascist space military force, a massive window in your hull is what's known as a weakness in the hull. Because of the nature of space and how vast it is, you don't really need line of sight visual confirmation when you're steering your ship around. And no matter how advanced your technology is, an opaque metallic surface will always be tougher than a transparent one. The best bridge designs are placed deep inside the hull of the ship, where they are safely surrounded by multiple layers of bulkhead and armor. If you really are desperate for a view of the outside world, it's better to use sensors and cameras and keep yourself out of harm's way. The Battlestar Galactica had a pretty well-designed command center that was placed exactly midship, which allowed it to continue fighting despite suffering heavy external damage. On the other hand, we had the Executor, which had a crew that numbered in the tens of thousands. The entire Star Dreadnought crashed right into the second Death Star after an A-wing was disabled and crashed right through the front viewport of the exposed bridge. It really makes no sense to create such a massive and large ship and leave your most important parts completely unprotected and kind of sitting above the ship just waiting for enemies to attack it.
Piet.
You know who else gets blasted into space because of a bad bridge design? Princess Leia. When she was stationed on board that Mon Cala cruiser, she unfortunately was blown right through the windshield after a proton torpedo took it out. What's interesting about this shot is the fact that Star Wars usually gets space combat wrong, but actually doesn't do a terrible job at portraying what actually happens to a person when they're exposed to vacuum. I mean, minus using the Force to fly through space, of course, but seriously, Star Wars, well, they don't necessarily get things more right than other franchises. They just get things less wrong than other franchises when it comes to exposing humans to vacuum. When you're in vacuum, you'll realize that space is incredibly cold. But because there's almost no air pressure or gases floating around you, there's no medium to conduct a transfer of heat. So you definitely wouldn't freeze to death immediately like what we see in Mission to Mars or in the film Sunshine. Heat will leave your body gradually. Your biggest danger is something a little bit more old-fashioned, and that's the lack of oxygen. Your body can only last maybe a few seconds or minutes if you are prepared. And that's because you can't hold your breath in vacuum. If you attempt to do so, any air pressure you try to hold in your lungs will explode outwards when you enter vacuum, which will most likely destroy your lungs and respiratory system. It's kind of like a weather balloon. As a weather balloon gets higher, the air pressure outside of it will decrease, which means the air pressure inside will increase, expanding the balloon wider and wider. Now, these weather balloons can make it up as high as like 24-25 miles, which at that point, the air outside will be so thin that the pressure inside will no longer be sustainable and burst out, and the balloon will burst just like your lungs will if you hold your breath. And so no, your eyes won't start bleeding like Baby Bear's does in Event Horizon, nor will your head just explode randomly like how it happens in Total Recall. No, instead you'll go quietly and quickly, or violently and quickly if you hold your breath. Please exhale. Oh, and one last thing, in vacuum, the boiling point of water is around room temperature, which means everything that has water in your body will cease being a liquid and begin to boil into a gas. This includes all the blood that is coursing through your veins. As you can see, space is very dangerous, and so are space battles, which is why it pays to be informed. I hope you guys learned something from our video today. Don't forget to check out the first part of this video. We'll link it somewhere in the top right corner. As usual, thanks for joining us today. My name is Alan, reminding you that life is a movie, and you are the protagonist.